I hope my presentation is visible.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So today, the day 2 session of Islamic architectural legacy in the lands of Islam, we will be continuing yesterday's the same dynasty, that is Umayyads, but we will be concentrating on the Spain. So how did they went to Spain, and then what were their architectural ideologies over there? And also we will try to understand the next empire, the second greatest dynasty in Islamic empire, that is the Abbasids. And also we will understand how these Abbasids built the city Baghdad and Samarra. So from Spain we will go to Iraq. So coming to the Cordoba, so this is a great mosque of Cordoba, which you can see in Umayyad Spain. Umayyads had built, which was in the settlements of Jewish and Christian settlements surrounding, you can see. And here for this session, I have divided into two parts. As I said, first will be the Umayyads. So in this section, we will look comparative analysis between the Mosque of Cordoba and also the other mosques which we studied in the last class. That is from Damascus and Al-Anjar and also Al-Aqsa Mosque and all. We will try to understand the comparative prototypes. And then we will also understand the building components like domes, arcades, and also different types of roofing, how it came up, and what are the structural techniques they have used for the construction, and also a lot of decorations, inscriptions we will understand for this mosque again. And next is we will also try to understand, like in different phases, different empire, different caliphs came. So how did they did this refurbishment, and also how the renovations were done. All these we will try to understand. And then we will try to understand Madinatul Zahra, that is a palace city, which was again constructed by these Umayyads, which was outside of Cordoba. So this was a royal seat for the Umayyads, and also it was like a house for the Caliph. So we will understand this in the part A. Then we will go to Iraq, that is for the Abbasids dynasty, and we'll understand the city planning of Baghdad and also Samarra. So here, just to recap with yesterday's session, we'll just have a comparative analysis. Like we understood the Mosque of Damascus, we understood also the Mosque of Al-Aqsa in Jerusalem, and then today we are going to look into this Mosque of Cordoba. So here we can see that all of these, either it's built on a temple or a temple was converted to church, and then church was again converted to this mosques. So here we see that it was an open courtyard with a hypostyle hall, and here it was a closed, but there was no courtyard. So also they both had T type of plans. They had the columns, spires, arches, similar kind of architectural characteristics. You can see the same thing you can see even here. And then you saw they had 4 minarets. And if you see, if you compare that with the Cordoba, they only had a single minaret. So this minaret kind of architectural element for the masjid started from the Umayyads. And either they used multiple minarets or they used individual single minarets. So here the use of these double-tiered arches and double-tiered, all these kind of characteristics, you can see it's been repeated. Also, this Mosque of Cordoba also was converted from the church. This is from the Abdul Rahman when he purchased the site from Christian community. He purchased that in 785. So this was the original church of Saint Vincent. So that was demolished and then reconstructed on that site. So we'll understand all these details in detail. So this particular Cordoba is located in this particular Iberian Peninsula. Here you can see this is Al-Andalus. You can see the influence of Muslim limit, the brown line, you can see this is the influence. They had the whole Al-Andalus on the Muslim influence. And then above this, the purple line, you can see this is the limit of Christian territory. So they had a lot of trade routes, the brown thin lines you can see. So let's understand a little bit of historical background of this, and then like the Iberian Peninsula. So this is actually the Iberian Peninsula. Iberian Peninsula means it is a region with countries like Spain and Portugal under Muslim rule. Also, they had here and there Christian roots also. So here, this Iberian Peninsula was first taken by the Arab armies. It was almost in 711. The Arabs and also the Berber tribes, they advanced across the Mediterranean. So they entered here through series of military campaigns, and then chief center was established in this Cordoba and Seville. And then this Spanish Umayyads, when they settled in this Iberia, they still looked the architectural characteristics of their ancestrals, that is the East. East means the Damascus, Al-Anjar, and also Jerusalem, Medina. So those, what we saw in the last class, so all those architectural characteristics still, they were like still very much interested to incorporate here also. And then apart from this, they also wanted, I mean, they were very much impressed with the pre-Islamic kind of architecture. So local architecture, all these styles they were impressed with. So this has become the mixture of all these ideas. So here, when the first Umayyad who came to Spain under the rule of Abdul Rahman. So Abdul Rahman was the first to come to Spain here. He was the last remaining descendant of Umayyad Caliph. So in 756, he was forced to flee to Syria from Baghdad. So that means the Abbasid Caliphates, their rival caliphates, almost they killed the whole family of Umayyads. So he was the only descendant. So first he was protected in Syria, and then he was he just reached Iberian Peninsula, and there he started his rule again. He started his own dynasty. So, but at the same time, in this particular Al-Andalus, already one rival caliphate was there, Abbasid, who was from Abbasids. So this this established like the Iberian Peninsula. It had two caliphates, so both of them coexisted together. And at the same time, you can see in Baghdad, the Abbasids also started their dynasty, and in Cairo, Fatimids also started their legitimacy. So each political group, they had claimed supreme leadership over the Islamic community, and based on different principles like what we understood in the last class, genealogical descents, and also the sectarian legitimacy. You know, they were like fighting with each other. So next, we'll come back to this Mosque of Cordoba here. So here, architecturally, the Great Mosque of Cordoba looks like an example of local building practices materials. What they have used here, like it's locally available, and also the forms. So also they took references, as I told, from the Umayyads monuments from Damascus, Jerusalem, and Medina. So the same references also they have taken here. So here, this mosque has a very complex history, and this has undergone various and numerous alterations and additions over 5 centuries almost. So some of the most substantial changes you can see, it's carried out by Al-Hakam II. We will understand this in coming slides. This was during 960 and during the era of 961 to 976, where Abdul Hakam had ruled. Abdul Hakam II, he has ruled. So we will see all these phases of changes. So when he commissioned a massive reworking of the mosque, through expansions and redecorations. He wanted to enhance the relationship of his building of, again, relating to ancestral Syrian lands. So he constructed a specific vision of the Umayyads in the Syria over here with respect to this church. I mean, sorry, this masjid. So this Cordoba, it is basically a walled city, and you can see the masjid with respect to the walled city. So here Cordoba, it grew over the existing, as I told, it was Christian and Jewish settlements. This was on the northern side of Guadalquivir River. So this river was flowing through Seville and Cordoba. So though both the cities were interconnected through this river. So here, this walled city is within the wall. You have the city, no? So that city is called as Medina here. The name of the city itself, it can be called as a Medina. So it was open at various positions with a series of protective gates. And within the inside of the walled city, there was a standard combination of Friday mosque. So Friday mosque means, as we discussed in last class again, there should be one mosque for the Friday prayers for the whole city. So this was that Friday mosque, this mosque of Cordoba, a great mosque. This was that mosque, which was meant for the accommodating the whole city's male Muslim residents. And also for daily prayers, they also had neighborhood mosques, and even they can even pray at home also for daily prayers. That's not this thing. But for the Friday, they have to come to the Great Mosque over here. So the Great Mosque is located in proximity to the Caliphal Palace. So here we can understand that even the palace and the pairing of the mosque and the palace, what we see in the last Damascus and also in Jerusalem, the same kind of pairing concept was used here also. So apart from the major monuments, the city was divided into separate, if you see the city, they also have been divided into different neighborhoods. And this neighborhoods was according to the confessional groups. So at the center of the city, there was Kasbah. Kasbah means it's a commercial hub. So until 936, Cordoba continued to grow extensively along this Guadalquivir River, and through series of palaces and lot of garden estates, they almost expanded the agricultural base of this city's hinterland. So here, let's understand a few useful terms which may be in Arabic and Persian languages. So we will just try to understand what are these. So here we'll come across the word munyas. Munyas means they are the estates combining the agricultural and residential functions. Then we'll come across maksura. Maksura we understood in the last class also. So just to recap here, this is an area in a mosque near the mihrab reserved for the ruler and his companions. So usually near the maksura, they had a very different luxurious kind of materials used just to show the richness. So next is Kasbah. As we understood, it's a commercial center. It's at the central part of the town. So here we will use one word, that is boshoir. Boshoir means it's a wedge-shaped tapered stone used in the construction of ark. So I'll show you the example of this. Next, squinch. Squinch is a very important term. If you know a little bit of Islamic architecture also, we are coming across this in almost all constructions. Like the squinches are very important to construct the dome. If you have a square room, and on top of that walls, they used to make octagonal projections. So that square was converted to octagon. So because of this octagon, the dome can be constructed. So that is the very important element in Islamic architecture. Actually it's a structural element, but then we can see its element in the interior of the dome, very beautifully carved. And then you have the dadoing. Dadoing means it's the lower part of the wall in a room. So it will be about the height of our waist. So there usually they used to use different color of materials with respect to the upper area of the wall. Then we have something called mudejar. Mudejar means this is an art form which was developed in Spain, basically, especially in this particular region only, it was developed. So here it is like partly Gothic and partly Islamic kind of style was developed. So this was developed by the Muslim artisans, and it's been used by many different rulers also, apart from Islamic, even the Christian and also the Jewish buildings also, they have used this kind of mudejar. And then we have something called mukarnas. Mukarnas is also a very important element, architectural element in Islamic architecture. So it is made up of concave cells. So this kind of mukarnas, we will come into many examples in our case studies. And this is usually described as a honeycomb or stalactite kind of this element. So you can even make these mukarnas on the half domes or even on the domes, or if you have these niches near the mihrabs and all, even there also you can make the mukarnas. So these mukarnas, usually they have used a lot of geometry and also a lot of algebra kind of calculations and all they have used. So to make these domes for the squinches and mukarnas, these star-shaped forms, like they used to first work on a 2-dimension, 2D designs, 2D patterns they used to do for these squinches and mukarnas. And after that, they used to extrude that to come up with the 3D form. So this is a very interesting kind of element you will find in almost many buildings, very beautifully carved. And then coming to the stages of construction of this particular mosque. So as we know that when the mosque of this mosque was the core of the urban development, since Umayyads made Cordoba as their capital. So when Abdul Rahman purchased, he made this much his mosque, and then Abdul Rahman too, he again added extra base for that. Then Abdul Hakam too, he again added enlarged the mosque, and then they have one more addition, that is the courtyard was added by Abdul Rahman III. Then Al Mansur, he added, he again enlarged little more bigger in size. This is to the population of the Muslim community was growing. Because of this, they added, they enlarged the footprint of this particular mosque. So this stages of construction we can see in these phases: phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, phase 4, and phase 5. So these are the phases. So we will understand those phases also in detail. So first, when Abdul Rahman won, so this was the addition, Abdul Rahman won. So this was in this there was earlier church, right? So that church was demolished. So here first he purchased the site from Christian community in 785. And when after the demolition of the Saint Vincent church, he just started construction of this. So when he started the construction, it was little away from the river, the Guadalquivir river. And then as it grew in size, it became very near to the river. So next, this mosque was completed in 786, and the first building had a wide courtyard, and it had walled side. So here you can see the wide courtyard and walled gateways, protective wall with a lot of gateways. And then they have the central aisle, as you can see in other mosques of Damascus. They also had a central aisle, little wider than the other aisles. And then they also covered up this particular prayer hall with flat roof, and they had a lot of round columns, as you can see here. And apart from round columns, they also had rectangular piers. Also, they had square piers, and this formed a series of arches to form arcades. So they had around 10 arcades over here, and each arcade here, they had almost 12 arches. So and then the columns selected for the central. So for this central arcade, when they were selecting the color of the columns, they used red as a material. So the choice red as a colored material, that shows they were trying to show the importance of the central axis. And also there is an emphasis to show the spatial hierarchy over here. So next coming so here we will understand about the structural and material components. So here they have used this hypostyle kind of hall. So they have used post and lintel kind of constructions. So post and lintel kind of constructions means it supports large amount of weight, and also it allows the building to rise higher than maybe 1 or 2 floors. So that height can be achieved with this kind of post and lintel construction. And also they can have very broad doorways. So that's why one more thing is they have so many history of enlargements and extensions and all, right? So this post and lintel kind of constructions, it allows these kind of enlargements and extensions and all. So here you can see they also used 2-tier arches, and they also used the Corinthian capitals over here. And each column, you can see there is again straight column which is supporting the double arch at the top. So here the cream color, what you see here, these are the washoirs, like alternating bricks and stones. So here they are going to use the word washoir. So washoir is one of the several units that make up an arch here. So after the first arch, the pier is springing from the column below and extends to support the second tier. So they are making 2 tiers of arches, something like this here. So which are again composed in a similar manner with the alternating washoirs. So washoirs, they are alternatingly using in all the arches. So this is the word washoir which we understood in our words. And then we have this roof. The roof is directly sitting on top of this structural form. And this is, like as I told, this is kind of a very structural element we see, which supports the continuation of the mosque as it grew. And also we will try to understand the spolias, what they have used. So here they have used the Corinthian kind of column capitals. So this came up with the plant acanthus. So this acanthus, this was used by even pre-Islamic times also in Greek and Roman periods. So in Greek and Roman periods, we also have this Doric and Ionic column capitals, but then in Islamic architecture, they were more influenced by the Corinthian kind of column capitals. So next, coming to the phase 2, that is Abdul Rahman 2. Here you can see the yellow one. So this was the extension carried out by Abdul Rahman 2. So here he added extra 8 bays to the existing what Abdul Rahman 1 had constructed. So here to make this enlargement of this hall, hypostyle hall, he has to demolish this Qibla wall. So there was a Qibla wall here. It was somewhere at the center over here. So that they demolished and then extended the hypostyle hall. So here you can see the hall was extended, but the courtyard was still not in proportion with the closed space. The open space was not in proportion with the closed space here. So, and then we will try to understand the next phase. So here the next phase under Abdul Rahman III. So here he didn't do any enlargement for the hall, but he tried to do enlargement in the courtyard. So here you can see this was the existing courtyard wall. So they demolished it and they made courtyard little bigger in size, just to balance the covered area for the prayer and the open courtyard. So this refurbishment of the mosque of the courtyard involved in the construction of alternating piers and columns. So here within the courtyard, they used a lot of columns and piers, and they also had 3 arches, and this improved the enhancement of the aesthetic and appearance of the courtyard, and it made it more imposing architecturally also. So during Abdul Rahman III, they also concentrated on erecting the minaret here. So this was the single minaret in line with the mihrab. In the same axis, they constructed the minaret. So during Abdul Rahman III, we can also see the construction of Madinat al-Zahra, which was outside the Cordoba. And that was the palace which was built for the Abdul Rahman, I mean for his family, and also it was like an administrative center also. So we will look into that also in our future slides. Next, coming to this addition of the minaret. So here the addition of the minaret was undertaken to enhance the visibility of the institution within and also out of the city walls. So the taller minaret announced the building's presence in a dense urban fabric to those people who were approaching the city. So one who were approaching the city, they can even look into this landmark kind of minaret. So by this time, this minaret became Sunni Islamic form, and it identified the Sunni mosques. So minaret was the first thing what Umayyads had developed, and this was the architectural element which even till now in contemporary time also minarets are very widely seen in all the mosques. So here coming to the phase 4, we have under Abdul Hakam, Al-Hakam II. So here what he did was, you can see here this particular mihrab. Earlier it was the mihrabs were within the wall, like a recessed niches. But here he made that as a room itself. So mihrab became as a recessed room. And then they differentiated the mihrab and also the maksura were outside of that. And then you can see 3 domes are there in front of the mihrab. So this became a very important space. And then they achieved that centrality, and also the hierarchy of important space was achieved over here. So here in these domes, the squinches and mukannas and all, we can see very beautiful decorations, very highly luxurious decorations and all we can see over here. So he also continued, like Abdul Hakam, all of these phases, no, in phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, phase 4, 5 and all. So they all continued the same kind of architectural characteristics of developing these double arches and these post and little kind of constructions. All those using the washoirs and using the Corinthian capitals, and also using all these foliated materials and all, they continued the same thing in all the phases. So we can see even like in the last class we were discussing like the requirement of the masjid. So for the grand masjid, they should have multiple doorways for the ease of movement within and also to exit from the mosques for high population like congregations when they come in the Friday mosques. So they added a lot of doorways here. So you also can see the doorways where they had used the arches above the doorways over here. So this is the view from the exterior. So now we can understand about the mihrab here. So mihrab was like, you can see it is a closed room. So with the maksura again it became a T shape. So the same T-shaped kind of concept which we followed in Damascus and Jerusalem, it was still followed here. But only the difference is mihrab there it was like a niche, and here it's like a closed room. So they used a lot of different materials, mosaics, carved plasters, and this mihrab also they used very luxurious materials, as I said. And uh, coming to the Maksura, here this is the entrance to the, this particular portal, it is the entrance to the Maksura. And this can be distinguished by, like you can see here, they have used lot of polylobed arches, and they also used horseshoe arch over here. So polylobed arches means, lobed means it is with respect to leaf shape. So they try to overlap the circles and then try to make the symmetrical kind of leaf kind of shape. So this was just to break the continuity of the horseshoe arches at the lower levels. They have used this band of polylobed arches over here. So the structural elements such as arches became very decorative space. So apart from the structural, like these arches are carrying the loads from the roof. Apart from that, they also acted as like decorative spaces. So here the Maksura section is designated by screens set either side, and then this is the area where we find heightened concentration of decorations and walls linked to the three domed spaces. So once you come inside, you have the three domed spaces what we see in the plan. And over the mihrab, we find the most exquisite dome, which is constructed and decorated in the most complex form. So we will also understand about the dome again. So here, this particular plan was impressed by the Christian plan, Christian church plan, which was San Miguel de Escalada. So here, Oleg Graber, he noticed the similarities and he suggested, so the requirement of Cordoba Mosque he noticed, and then he suggested Al-Hakam to adopt this kind of concepts. So this shows that they were working each other, these Christians and the Muslim rulers, they were working together for their religious buildings. So they were exchanging their ideas and concepts. And then coming to the central dome of the Maksura. As I was telling you, you can see here, this is a square room. The walls are square at the bottom. And at the top, you can see the roof, how they have added the squinches. So this part is called the squinch. And then they constructed the circular dome on top of the squinch. So the dome over the center rising before the mihrab is slightly wider than the others. So the surface of the dome is treated as a series of ribbed forms that span the octagonal zone of transition set between circular dome and the square chamber. And then the spaces between the intersecting ribs. So they have used lot of ribs while constructing these domes. So in between those ribs also, they have filled with continuous brick surfaces that has been again plastered and also redecorated with the colored and gold mosaic cubes. So here, this complex structure culminates with a smaller cusped dome. Cusped dome means they have used two domes. So one is from the interior and one from the outer. So they used to maintain the proper scale and proportion from the interior surfaces, how much height they need. They have tried to achieve that from the internal dome, and then for the outer scale and proportion, they have uh, heightened the outer dome. So in between this inner dome and the outer dome, they used to add lot of structural components. So for the supporting purpose and all, they used to use this space in between two domes. So the lower walls are decorated with the carved plaster and mosaic. So here continuity between the dome and the building is expressed through a shared materials and forms. So decoration on the lower area of the dome includes carved panels, and they also used a lot of marble. They also used polychrome mosaics. Polychrome mosaics means they used a lot of colors, many colors they have used, and combining the abstract and vegetal motifs of epigraphic content. So here you can see a lot of epigraphic contents are there. So epigraphic contents means usually the ancient scripts they are using. So here you can see the flanking domes, the central dome, and then the supporting domes for that. So they have the inner and the outer domes, and then again on top of that they have used flat surface, the sloping roofs. So here, dome above the mihrab, you can see again the same kind of squinchers. You can see this is the square plan, square walls, and then they have added these squinches, and then came the dome. So here, the domes above the treasury and the entrance to the corridor. So flanking the central dome over the mihrab while treated similarly have a simpler form. So they had many domes. Only the central dome was given more height of concentration on decorations and other things. So a lot of intricate designs were there. But other domes, in a similar way, they have constructed, but they have used less decorations. So here the flanking domes lack the opulent mosaic treatment. So mosaic treatments are not there, and these extensive inscriptions and all that, it is not there. So that will be appeared only in the central dome where the mihrab is there. And through this treatment of surfaces, there is an attempt to establish a relatively hierarchy between the important dome and less important kind of forms. So we can say that they are trying to show this hierarchy through the decorations. So coming to the mosaic decorations here, throughout the building, there were a lot of vegetal motifs, which is set inside the panels. So here you can see very different kind of plants and also arranged, which are arranged in a scrolling pattern. So plants and all were the main elements which they are using for decorations. So here inscriptions were again rendered as you see in Damascus and Jerusalem, the same kind of gold and blue, gold on blue, and also gold on red. That pattern was again followed here. So the lower sections of the walls were covered with the dados, and this was with the marble here below. So the marble panels were treated as a symmetrical units with a central field surrounded by borders. So unnatural and natural symmetrical plans were generated, and they give an impression of a very wealthy and sumptuousness. That means a very extremely rich and costly, luxurious kind of impression they were giving. So they reference the fertility of the soil Cordoba region. So this richness, the richness of that particular region, they were showing with respect to their treatment of the walls and of these interior walls, and also dome of the mihrabs and all. Those decorations, they were indicating the richness of this region. And then coming to the, again you can see here the mosaic decorations, the same dadoing. So this was the dadoing. So you can see in detail how they have used the scrolling patterns of the plants and the leaves. And this was the inscriptions, what they have used here. So next, coming to the details of the inscriptions here, Al-Hakam editions included a highly developed epigraphic program mostly composed of carefully selected verses from Quran. So here you can understand what is a Kufic script. I have highlighted because there was a question in the last class. Due to the angularity and geometric form of Kufic script, it can be easily rendered in a grid matrix. So mosaic squares can be formed in a grid like a puzzle to compose a letter unit here. So separate chapters from the Quran were executed in the carved plaster and inlaid mosaic through the selection of these texts. So certain statements were made about the building itself, like who has built and what was the era and what was their concept, and all those things we can see in the inscriptions, historical references and all we can see in the inscriptions. So the inscriptions also make connections to Jerusalem, that is to King Solomon. So King Solomon was before he was in pre-Islamic era, before Prophet Muhammad. So here a prophecy attributed to Solomon described in some of the textual sources stated that one day a mosque will be built in Cordoba. So in that era itself, it was told that in Cordoba, this grand mosque will be constructed. So this creates a narrative which traces the origin of Great Mosque of Cordoba back to the time of Prophet Solomon. So taken together, the Mosque of Cordoba has a dense matrix of texts, and it also defines the ideology of Umayyads, and then with respect to their other dynasties like Fatimids and the Abbasids. So here the texts with a statement of Abdul Hakam's order, these columns be built, and that they were sanctioned by the god. So they refer that it was sanctioned by the god. So historical references also texts say, some of the historical records say that the activity of what Al-Hakam II has carried, so it was pure in nature, and also he benefited the community. So here the text argues that Al-Hakam's action was very legitimate, and therefore it was an act of goodwill. So he also paid very licit funds. Licit funds means a very very clean fund, clean money to the purity of the mosque, and also here additions of the emphasized alongside broader assertions of the religion and the divine sanction. So here the inscriptions were also used to announce additions to the building, and these panels found throughout the mosque, which are documenting the patronages. And they also describe the sequence of those who were responsible for planning and also executing additions, all those activity what carried out in all the phases, that we can understand in these inscriptions. So here you can see the inscriptions on the dome. So an inscription which is appearing here, it's almost referring the Abrahamic community. So that is, the mission of Abraham also was very in detail inscribed here in these inscriptions. And one of the inscription, it states the Quran verses as stated over here. I'll just read that verse. So, "O you who have believed, go and prostrate and worship your Lord and do good, so that you may be succeed, and strive for Allah with the striving due to Him. He has chosen you and has not placed upon you in your religion any difficulty. So the religion of your father, that is Abraham. So Allah named you Muslims before former scriptures, and in this revelation that the messenger may be witness over you and you may be witness over the people." So this was one of the verse in the Holy Quran that they have done the inscriptions here. So this achieved a connection in established between the historical text and those in the domes. So this meaning was directed towards the larger theme of unifying the caliphates. So as I told, they had a lot of rivalries. So with this inscription, Abdul Hakam II, he was trying to have some unification between the caliphates. So this particular mosque was again consecrated by the Christians, and they again converted the mosque into church. Here, the building of the city of Cordoba, where again, as I told, it was again reclaimed by the Christians. This was under King Ferdinand III. So the mosque was then reconsecrated, and then Cathedral of Santa Maria. This was erected there. So the original building when it was a mosque, it was oriented to the Qibla wall, and later they added this Christian worshipping space here, and then they reoriented according to the convention of east-west direction. And again, they added a lot of series of altars and funerary chapels, and also they added to the building like a lot of reconstruction and all happened during this era. So here we can understand that the style Mudejar, what we just discussed, the style of Mudejar was established here, and this was the kind of artistic Islamic element which was developed in generations of Muslim craftsmen. So this was specialized materials and techniques and all used, whatever they have used in this mosque, they have almost adopted even in the Christian and the Jewish patterns. And after the reconquest of 1236, the Great Mosque was preserved as a symbol of victory. So immediately in 1236 itself, they didn't start the changes after the reconquest. It was almost in between 1486 and 1496, they made major changes because of like a lot of people, they were having controversy on this church. So then the Gothic cathedral was transplanted here, and at the center, making the radical transformation and intervention into the historical building. So here, the minaret was there earlier. So that minaret they changed into a Christian bell tower. Yeah, this was in the era 1618. The upper section of the minaret, they had adopted that to make that as a bell tower. So later, this continuous adaptation, like the complicated history of this particular building, resulted in a very jumble of spaces and a lot of juxtapositions over there. So this speaks the history of the Iberian Peninsula. So when you look into this particular building, so you can understand the entire history, lot of phases within the mosque construction, and also after the conversion of the church. So all those you can understand the entire history when you see this particular mosque. So here the ideology of the Umayyad victory we can understand in these three essential components. First is the structural and decorative references, what they have used from the Umayyad past. They have tried to incorporate this even in the Spain. Then the inscriptions. So the idea of Umayyad's victory, all those things in the form of texts, they have tried to express it in this building, which can be still seen. And also the 4 pages of Quran, as I read the verses. So this was the earliest scripts what were achieved by Caliph Uthman. So this Caliph, he was assassinated at 656. So from him, they had these 4 pages of Quran, these Umayyads had. So this has been inscribed here. So that's why this becomes very like a historical place. And then coming from this mosque, we will jump to Alcazar of Cordoba. So Alcazar means it is palace. It is called as palace. So here, when Visigoths means they were the earlier Germans. So when they constructed their palace, they had these audience halls, they had the residential units, admin offices, and also a lot of gardens and pools in their palaces. So later, when Umayyads they added the special techniques of horticulture and grafting over here, and they improved the palace actually. So they also added a lot of agricultural estates called munas, and many series of extramural palaces also they added. So this became Madinat al-Zahra. So here you can see the palace of Madinat al-Zahra, which was constructed in 936 to 940. So this was built in the reign of Abdul Rahman III in 929 to 961, and this was again occupied by his successors. So here, this building is very distinct from the Great Mosque of Cordoba, which looks like Umayyad model inspirations. But here, they have tried to understand the local practices and also the local styles, and also the surrounding topography and all they have tried to understand over here. And also they tried to develop their concepts with respect to like how Abbasids had started their city in Samarra and Baghdad. So some concepts were ideas were also taken from there. So here Umayyads drew from a range of available material architectural models and in order to legitimize themselves as the Muslim rulers in the Iberia and to embrace a larger Muslim community. So here you can see the Cordoba with respect to Madinat al-Zahra. So this is the location, and this is that Guadalquivir river, what I have just told. So here this Madinat al-Zahra, it can be divided into three zones: the upper level, middle level, and the lower level. So upper and middle level, usually they had the buttresses, buttressing walls they had. This was enclosed within that. So here you can see the construction of that Madinat al-Zahra, which is on the topography of the hill, almost the skirt of the hill. So here you can even like they had a very beautiful view towards the river, and also elevated this heightened mountains and all. They had a very beautiful view towards this. So this was an extensively cultivated zone. So in building the palace at this site, the plan was carefully developed in light of features of natural topography. So they also used a lot of calculations to make these level differences and all. And they used many terraces and retaining walls to make these constructions. So here we will end the Umayyad dynasty, all the case studies of Umayyads, and we will start the part 2 session. This is the largest, second largest Sunni caliphate, that is Abbasids. So here we will try to understand the architectural characteristics of Abbasids cities, that is Baghdad and Samarra. So here let's understand a little bit of historical context of Abbasids. So Abbasids, their revolution, it started in Mari, that is at present it is called as Tajikistan. So they were actually the descendants of uncle of Prophet Muhammad. His name is Abbas ibn Abdul Muttalib. So he ruled from 752 to almost his dynasty, they ruled from 752 to 945. So they ruled independently almost. They also had a lot of other domination during their eras. They had many vassal dynasties also. So like this, they have the Shibuid dynasty, they have the Seljuk dynasty, and also in 1258 they had the fragmentation of this Abbasid territories. And then there was the uh, Mongols had invaded, and actually these Mongols only, they had ended the Abbasid Caliphates, and they almost destroyed the entire Baghdad. So after this came the Mamluk, and these Mamluks, one of the Abbasids, they had rehabilitated. So this was during 1250, and here this Abbasid Caliphate, he was rehabilitated in Cairo. And then what happened when Ottomans came in 1500s? They just they ended the pseudo Abbasid and also the caliphs, all the caliphs of Abbasids and Mamluk dynasty also they ended. So this is how the Abbasids started and then ended in this eras. So here you can see in the 9th century how the Abbasids had having their core at the center here near the Baghdad, Samarra. This whole thing was the core of the Abbasids, and they also had many vassal dynasties. They were the Rustamids, Idrisids, Aghlabids, Tulunids. So like this here they had Samanids. So they were all under the legitimacy of Abbasids. Next here, during the Abbasids period, as I told, they had many independent states. So Aghlabids in the North Africa, Tulunids in the Cairo, and then Samanids in the Central Asia, and the Persian dynasties and all, they came up here. So from this Persian dynasty came the Ghaznavids and also the Turkic Delhi Sultanates. So here, during the Abbasids, the language of bureaucracy was Persian in the east, and then they used Arabic in the Western Islamic lands. So as the geography shifted from the Mediterranean, so Mediterranean means where we just understood about the Iberian Peninsula and all. So as this shifted to Iraq under Abbasids, the legacy of Perso-Sasanian dynasty increasingly became a source of inspiration for the Abbasids, who largely rejected the Umayyad heritage. So that means Umayyads were very much impressed with the Roman and also Greek kind of construction, right? So here Abbasids were very much impressed with the Sasanian kind of constructions. So the Perso-Sasanian kind of architectural elements you can see in Abbasids architecture. So let's understand a little bit of the Sasanian dynasty. So this Sasanian dynasty means in Iran and Iraq it came up during the second and the second half of 6th century. So this was again pre-Islamic. So the Sasanian dynasty had ruled just before the emergence of Prophet Muhammad here. So this was a Mesopotamian culture. So in the Sasanian means it was all Mesopotamian culture which developed under the around the Tigris River. So you can see the Tigris River over here. So the capital of Sasanian was this Ctesiphon, which was south of Baghdad. So this is Baghdad, this is Samarra. So the Abbasids created a completely new capital, that is the Baghdad here, so which was around 30 kilometers from Sasanian capital, Ctesiphon. So further north, you can see over here Samarra, which was created as a military enclave. So this Baghdad became a capital, and Samarra also they made as a capital. So this became like a dual capital during the Abbasids. So in Umayyads also, you can see in Spain, Cordoba and Madinat al-Zahra, they were the dual capitals. And here also during Abbasids, they had the dual capitals. So this is the aerial view of Baghdad and Samarra. As you can see here, this was a circular city, and actually this was a sprawling city. We will just have a look into detail of that. So Baghdad was constructed by this Caliph Al-Mansur in 762. So the round city of this particular city, it was around 2000 meters in diameter during those times in 7th century. So this had an outer ring, and also this particular outer ring, it had many houses and shops, and they are cut with four streets here. You can see these four streets, and each street it had a barrel wall. I mean, these streets it had a barrel walls. So they had a roof with a barrel moat, and then each street they also had the gates. So these gates are named with those respective direction of the surrounding cities. So this was the gate of Damascus, gate of Khurasan, gate of Basra. Then you have gate of Kufa. So each gate they had upper domes where the palace, from where the caliph used to just view the entire city. So when he stands on these domes, he can even look into the entire this thing. And also he used to meet people over there in these gates. So we will get back to that in detail. And then we have this inner circle. So inner circle, usually they had the mosque and then the palace. So the same kind of pattern in Umayyad, what they used to follow the uh, mosque and palace position, the same they had used even here. So the similar pattern of Umayyads, which was in Damascus and also in Jerusalem. So also they had a lot of in the inner circles, these high and elite people used to stay, and also they had palace and I mean smaller palaces, and also harem, and also harem means it's a place where the princes are staying, and they also had a lot of police quarters and all those things. So here let's understand the inspiration of Abbasids from the Sasanian architecture. So here you can see the King Khusro. This was in Ctesiphon. This art was in Ctesiphon. This is called as a Ivan. So this was built by King Khusro. This was a palace actually. Right now, only the Ivan is existing. So everything is deteriorated. So here the idea of Ivan was the Mesopotamian indigenous architecture. So this idea you can see in many more further masjids and also many other buildings of Islamic architecture. So this idea was taken from this particular Mesopotamian architecture. So here the Abbasids, they changed their materials, like we can see in Mediterranean regions, they were using stone and marble and all those things in those geographical available materials. But here they have used the baked and unbaked bricks. Maybe they have also used clay and stucco ornaments, apart from the marble what they had used in Umayyads. So here this became a very if you see Baghdad, and if you compare that to the Mediterranean lands, so the monuments are very less seen in this Baghdad. Because that is the reason they have used this material. This is not long lasting actually. So it is very less conducive also for sculptural treatments. You can see some of the buildings are very monotonous and very flat. And the walls had very unleavened and blind niches. Decorative compartments were later, after some time, they had added some colors to this, and they used some colored bricks, glazed bricks, ceramic tiles. This was in later Seljuk period, but during the Abbasids, it was only the baked brick, whatever they had to do, the carvings on that particular material they had used. So we will look into all these details. So here you can see the domeless Great Mosque of Al-Mansur. So Al-Mansur, the Abbasids, they came little away from the style of Umayyads. Umayyads, they use a lot of decorative domes, right? So here they did a domeless mosque. So the same type of hypostyle prototype what Prophet Muhammad had used for his mosque in Medina, they just followed the same type of concept here. So the mosque of Al-Mansur in Baghdad from 8th century had a flat roof resting on a brick piers rather than marble columns, as in what you see in Umayyads. So when this mosque became too small, again later in 9th century, they added the one more expansion. So they had these two expansions. But right now we cannot see all these. It's all deteriorated. So we can only see the mihrab. So here you can see the mihrab. So this particular mihrab, there is a echo of Mediterranean heritage also, and we can see some classical form of conch and shell flanked with colonnades. You can see these colonnades here. So eventually, after the move of Abbasids court to Samarra, a new type of abstract ornament emerged as a precursor of the so-called arabesque design. So arabesque is also, the word arabesque also you will come across in Islamic architecture. It's more popular. So this particular style was developed during this era of Abbasids. So I was talking to you about the gateways, right? So this was the gateway what you see in Baghdad. So they had 4 gateways entering into the city. So each gateway had a domed upper hall from which the Caliph used to view, and also he used to show himself to the people. And sometimes when the Caliph did not want to receive his ambassadors, he used to receive them over here. So this is that vaulted roof on the streets, what we discussed. So they also had lot of shops over here. So this was the barrel vault. So all these now in present era we cannot see. It's all deteriorated. So coming to Samarra. So you can see the Samarra over here. So this city was excavated in the late Ottoman period by Ernst Herzfeld. So this is the site which is recognized by the UNESCO World Heritage Site, and it is not like in Baghdad we saw it is confined within the gateways. The city was confined, but here this was not confined. This was a sprawling settlement with multiple foci, and that developed along the river Tigris. So here. So it had a vast residential areas for the many slave armies. So here you can see the emergence of slave army. That is, they came from the Turk. So these Turkish people, when they entered into the Islam, they entered as a slave armies to these caliphs. So as a slave soldiers, they had entered. So from the emergence of this Seljuk Turks onwards, as supporters to the weak, so they were like supporting the weak Abbasid caliphs. Most Islamic dynasties, except those ruling in the Maghreb and the Spain, came from the Turco-Mongol origins, and they often adopted this Persian as their court language. So as I told, in the east they adopted Persian, and in the west Arabic was the main language. So coming to the comparison of Baghdad and Samarra. So if Baghdad was a palace city, Samarra is a city of palaces. That means there were many palaces even in Samarra, though it was a military city. So here huge palaces, complexes with their barracks are almost like cities to themselves. So very wide, very rich kind of cities, palaces were there. And Samarra developed along the riverfront, and many major canals and waterways were created here. So as well as wide avenues where the Caliph and the slave armies would march from palace to the Friday Mosque. So here you can notice that the Friday Mosque and the palace was not together. So they were connected with these processional kind of avenues. So here, unlike the Umayyad examples, the palace is again the same thing what I have just told. So next, the initial settlement was in Samarra, and later Al-Mutawakkil. So he is one of the caliph. When he decided to create a whole new settlement further north, that means he wanted to develop the Samarra a little more on the north. And later these Turkic slaves, they themselves killed him. So then the Abbasids again, they brought back their capital in the Baghdad. they shifted back to Baghdad. So then Samarra became little abandoned from that stage. So here you can see the race course, the aerial view of the race course in Samarra. So the games was very important in Samarra. So the race courses were of massive scale here. So here you can see one clove shape over here and one bottle shape over here. So it was also connected with the rectangular, like the Khalif used to sit here and he used to watch. They had a rectangular hippodrome. So this can be detected in this aerial photograph also. So at present, these they have excavated, and some of them they have excavated and restored, and lot of things it's missing right now in today's era. And also there at the center you can see there was a round hill, and top of this Caliph used to sit and he used to survey the horse racing, etc. So rectangular hippodrome also it is called as a city square, so which is attached to the Caliphal palace. So we will look into here. It was attached to the Caliphal palace. This whole precinct you can see it was a Caliphal palace. So here the Caliph, I mean here you can see there was a river. This was the river Tigris. So this particular Caliphal palace, it was surrounded by many barracks, and also here you can see the military barracks were there. And these military barracks, they had their own masjids. And here the palace also had a very big masjid, but it was not very near to the palace. Masjid and the palace were little away. And in these mosques, they added ziyada kind of areas. So this we discussed in the last class, that the masjid had a lot of other activities so related to the religious thing. So those kind of ziyada areas and all we can see in these masjids. But this masjid, I'm going to show you little more detail in later slides. And these masjid, what we see in Samarra, it is having spiral minarets. So this was inspired by ziggurats. And after the masjid in Samarra, which is the spiral minaret, after this only we can see it in Tulun, that is Ibn Tulun Mosque in Cairo. So after that, that particular mosque, that spiral kind of minaret was never used. So we will get into all those architectural details. It's a very interesting detail, we will understand it. So here we can see also if any emissaries or any ambassadors and all, they used to come, this was the gateway for them. So this was called as Bab al-Amma. So through Bab al-Amma, they used to enter inside, and then they used to have one more entrance hall, and after that they had a wide rectangular courtyard, and then they used to view these race course. So the other side was the race course over here. So we will understand the Bab al-Amma in a detail. So here you can see they had a lot of green spaces, a lot of gardens through when they are entering from the main river. So here we'll try to understand how this triple Ivan they have used. This was the inspiration which they got from King Khusro's Ctesiphon ark. That was the Ivan what they have tried to imitate in this particular space. So right now you can see only the Ivan. The entire thing is missing. The whole precinct is missing. So after passing through the triple arched public audience gate, one encountered the public audience hall. So as I told, this was the entrance to the public audience hall. So we will understand its detailed inscriptions and all that. And then also you had this Samar al-Ashik palace. So this was as I told, Samarra had many palaces. This was one of the palace which was on the other side of the river bank. So you can see the entire construction was this side. So the other side of this particular river, you can see very few buildings. So this is one of them, Samaran. So Samara Kasral Ashik. So this was also like called as a palace for lovers. So the whole Samaras like this was constructed in 890, sorry 878 to 82, and later it was like abandoned. So here we will try to understand the ornamental details of uh, these walls of Samara, and also we will try to compare that with the Umayyads Shatta Palace in Jordan. So here you can see how Umayyads, they have used very natural forms of the flowers, and then here you can see the same has been like converted as an abstract form. So the concept of abstractism, you can see, you can understand here that it started from this era of Abbasids. So here a very different type of ornament was developed here. So this is reflecting the change in material and also aesthetics, which we understood from the ideology of the Abbasids. So here the ornamental facade of the Umayyad, so that is the Mshatta, this was in 740. So these ornaments and all, no, they have shifted to museums in Berlin. So here, during the Ottoman period, the German archaeologists, they used to do a lot of research and all that. When they found these detailing, they took these detailing to the Berlin, and they have until now it is saved there in that museum. So this Umayyad period ornamental facade here, as I told, it's having very you can see a triangle is there, and this is a kind of 8-lobed central medallions. So lobed means it is related to leaf again. So they are using a lot of vegetal motifs here, and very naturalistic kind of ornaments they are using. So in the Babal Amma, this is Abbasid's Babal Amma decorations. Here you can see again what I told, that they have geometry sized. That means they have done the abstracted form of these kind of natural thing. And they used to use lot of animal features also, but not near the religious walls. So animal features like peacocks, peasants, and also like lions and griffins. So griffins means they are the mythical creatures which had head, wings, and the body like a lion. So these kind of features they were using, but uh, it's all not. I mean, we cannot see it now, so it is not present available. So only by the sources and texts we can understand that they were also using some of the animal forms, but again it was not in the religious buildings. So here um, so here you can understand the difference between the Umayyads decorations and also the Abbasids abstract forms and all, you can understand very well. And also the material, what they have used in Umayyads, and the materials what they have used in the Abbasids. This is again based on the geographical locations and the available materials. So here you can see there is a form called beveled styles. Also we can see in these Babal Amma, in Samara buildings and all. So look at the plinth and all the detailings. They all have this beveled styles. So this kind of ornament where they have geometry-sized the abstract patterns have beveled edges. So characterized by carved slanted cut. So the beveled style was cheap and attractive. Uh, this way of decorating the huge settlements in Samara in a short time. So time period required for these kind of decorations was very less. They don't have to spend many years on the decorations. So these patterns were applied generally on the stucco walls, and often the lower parts you can see, these are the dadoing. So the dadoing, what we saw in the Umayyads, that was mostly they were using marbles. But here you can see they have used a lot of stucco works, and they have used the plasters, and also they have carved a lot of figural motifs on these. So they have also used many molds, and they have done a lot of repetitive designs here. So the rhythm, you can see the repetition and rhythm in their patterns. So here you can also see they have used wooden carvings and paintings on the wood. Also they have used, but here I don't have those pictures. So here you can understand that these abstract forms, they are not having any foreground or background. Like it is like the even these uh, patterns what they have used, they don't have any uh, start or any end. So it's like continue. So the patterns everywhere, it's just continue. So here, this artists and all, no, they are admiring these kind of fascinating designs, because even in the modernist concepts, this lot of abstractism and all we come up. So, so this kind of art was developed in those days itself. That's why it has become like a very interesting form for the artists. So today I'm going to end for the session of the Abbasids for Baghdad and Samarra. And in tomorrow's session, we will be covering the little more architectural empire of Abbasids. Then we will go to Cairo. So Cairo, which was